Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. We welcome you and our Global Maritime Club members that have joined us for our member webinar, Spotlight on EEXI Regulatory Compliance, brought to you by the Maritime Online series. The Maritime Club, now in its third year, connects senior leaders from across the global shipping industry, and through this powerful alliance, our objective is to promote, protect, and proactively enable positive economic development across all corners of the entire maritime industry. If you're not a member of the club but have been invited to join this invite-only webinar and you want to find out how to join, please express your interest in the chat option on your screen and we'll be in touch. Today, we'd like to thank our conference partner, ADNOC Logistics and Services, and our affiliate sponsor for today's session, Lloyd's Register. Before I introduce today's moderator, there are a few housekeeping notes to make you aware of. Towards the end of the session today, we'll be diving into questions from the audience. So I'd encourage you to all use the Q&A function on the right-hand side of this broadcast. If you're viewing in full screen mode, you may have to minimize the player to use the Q&A function. The team is monitoring the questions in the background and will present as many of the questions to the panel as possible. And if you're worried you haven't got enough time to take notes, don't panic. You'll be able to watch back today's session on demand and share with colleagues that couldn't make it to the live broadcast today. To introduce our panel and guide us through the next 60-minute discussion, please welcome your moderator for this session, Managing Director of PB Marine Consulting, Paul Bartlett. Over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, and thanks for joining. I'm Paul Bartlett, Managing Director of PB Marine Consulting, and over the next 60 minutes we'll be discussing issues relating to raising the efficiency and reducing the carbon footprint of existing ships, particularly older ones, between now and 2030. As you know, at the IMO's recent MEPC 76 meeting, the Energy Efficiency Existing Ship Index and the Carbon Intensity Indicator were adopted, and they will enter force in January 2023. While EEXI is a one-time measure based on Energy Efficiency Design Index for new ships, which was introduced in 2013, the CII is a metric that will require steady operational and performance improvements from 2024 onwards, although the targets from 2026 to 2030 have not yet been set. As Emma previously mentioned, we'd love you to take part in the discussion today, and you can submit your own questions using the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Please type your questions into that area and the team will get them to me, and we'll do our best to weave them into the conversation with our esteemed panel. So without further ado, it's time to meet them. We have a very interesting mix of skill sets here today. Firstly, I would like to introduce Tony Foster, Chief Executive Officer of Marine Capital, a London-based shipowner which operates assets on behalf of financial investors. Tony has many years of experience on the commercial side of shipping, including investment, owning, managing, and buying and selling ships. He will, I'm sure, be able to provide insights into some of the commercial and operational challenges that owners will face in the months ahead. We then have Matthew Williams, an expert on the regulatory regime from Classification Society Lloyd's Register. It is Matthew and his colleagues who will be providing a sounding board and guidance for ship operators on potential strategies both in the short run between now and January 2023, and from then until 2030 and beyond. Also on the panel today, we have Marcus Arnio, Chief Naval Architect and co-founder of Finnish ship design company 4Ship. Marcus studied naval architecture and marine engineering at the University of Helsinki, and since then has specialized in research and development in the ship design field, with a particular specialism in cruise and passenger vessels. More recently, he has focused on the development of practical decarbonisation strategies for owners of all ship types. We are also joined by Elias Baletis, who is the Director, Propellers and Transmission at the technology company Wärtsilä. Elias has spent much of his career on the development and introduction of new technologies, and recently has focused on systems integration and the incorporation of energy-saving devices in marine applications. So we are lucky enough to have a 5-star lineup today. The format is as follows. First, I'd like to invite each panelist to speak for 3 or 4 minutes on how the IMO's new indices are likely to impact the global shipping business from their perspective. And I suggest that we follow the same order as the introductions I have just made. I will then offer a short summary of the main points so far. And as Emma has explained, we'll have a short video then from our conference partner, ADNOC Logistics and Services, before embarking on an interactive discussion between the panelists. During this time, we hope that other participants in the webinar will pose questions and make comments for the panelists to consider and respond. We will do our best to make sure that as many issues are addressed as possible, but we do only have a 1-hour slot. So, Tony, would you like to kick off with your comments and perspectives, please?
Thanks, Paul. This is a very big subject. So I think what I can do usefully at the beginning is to just make a few comments about some of the things that have come to our mind on this topic. Firstly, in the introductory material provided, there's a statement that says, ship owners are under intense pressure to assess and validate the efficiency and carbon performance of existing vessels before the introduction of new indices proposed by the IMO for introduction in January 2023. So my first comment is that's not really true. EEXI is a one-off measure. It's a technical calculation. Certainly in our case, running fairly modern bulk carriers, we're more or less unaffected in the sense of having to make no technical or operational changes. And we think class may be under pressure in terms of all the submissions that classification societies will have to deal with. But in the short term, we are not affected. We also wonder whether owners may try to arbitrage between classification societies. Might be a slightly controversial statement, but it's not unheard of. Matthew will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that classification societies will have, each one will have their own calculation methodology. And one does wonder if owners might be shopping for classification societies which have a more lenient computer than others. So that's the sort of short-term picture from our perspective. But what's really coming down the line, CII is much more important, and its implementation is of much greater interest or concern. The A to E categorizations which are associated with CII, at least for now, carry no little or no penalty, but it may well be the case that they could be applied by charterers to limit their choice of tonnage. For example, charterers might say we'll only work with ship owners who operate in categories A and B, and that could be highly influential. I would only caveat that by saying that history tells us that charterers talk a good game when it comes to the type of ships that they are willing to charter. But when the market is very tight, those rules or self-made rules tend to be forgotten. So it'll be interesting to see what happens if we have very tight markets, as we have today in the container world, whether those restrictions or self-imposed restrictions will apply. One obvious feature of the current market is that, with the exception of container ships, new building market is extremely quiet. And as everybody knows, this is due to a combination of regulatory uncertainty and higher cost for dual fuel ships, for example. And we see an irony in the situation that the arguably soft position taken by the IMO is actually improving the earnings prospects for existing ships, and thereby arguably again prolonging their longevity. So it would seem that we're in a situation where market players throughout the sectors are piling into existing assets in the belief that they can maximize earnings from older ships in the short to medium term and not worry about the longer term. So there are lots of questions in the medium and longer term, not the least of which is debt finance, for example, the tightening that we can expect from major lending banks, tightening of the Poseidon principles. But in the short term, to mix metaphors, it looks like plain sailing. So hopefully that will stimulate a few comments from my colleagues, Paul.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. There were several very interesting points made there. I think it's a good moment to pass on to Matthew and to find out, first of all, what he's going to say, but also his response to the suggestion that there may be, quite a bit of competition between classification societies as they seek to cash in on this short-term business between now and January the year after next. So, Matthew, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul, and thanks for setting me up, Tony, for some immediate responses. I think just talking more generally first about EEXI, the Energy Efficiency Existing Ships Index, Regulation 23 and 25 of MARPOL Annex 6. Similar view really to that expressed by Tony. It's very much a ticket to the game. You need to have a new international energy efficiency certificate issued to you, so the ships do need to comply with EEXI, but it really locks in what the industry has already been delivering in terms of slow steaming since 2008. And certainly looking at its potential impacts, we're seeing more of a trimming of the fleet and some slowing in sectors of the industry, generally based on the size of ships and the age of ships, unsurprisingly. But EEXI is not going to be transformational. The challenge really with EEXI, and I think Tony alluded to it with his sympathy towards classification societies about the amount of work involved, is the amount of work involved, particularly for pre-EEDI ships, in getting to the point where ships can demonstrate compliance with the regulation. And for some ships, that's already less than 18 months away. And it's that tight timeline relative to the amount of work required to demonstrate compliance that presents a real challenge here. And one of the potential impacts of EEXI in the short term is some disruption to the availability of ships, if ships can't get their international energy efficiency certificates by the deadline that's required after the 1st of January 2023. In terms of the sort of Tony's idea about the competition between classification societies, I think it's important to recognise that the calculation of EEXI, just like the calculation for EEDI, is a mandated calculation. And there's a single standard for that that's produced by the IMO. So there's no way of playing the system, if you like, by changing classification societies. Where there is a slight challenge, which I think does speak to Tony's point slightly, is that there's quite a lot in the guidance around calculation of EEXI, which is left to the discretion of the verifier. But through organisations like EEXI, we are working to ensure a consistent approach across the board to the calculations of EEXI to address the kinds of challenges that Tony highlighted. In terms of compliance with EEXI, given the short time frame, we are expecting overridable power limits, and I emphasise overridable power limits, to be the go-to means of compliance for most sectors. But it's important to recognise that those overridable power limits, they might be a quick fix for EEXI, but they don't necessarily help you with the performance under the operational carbon intensity requirement, which could well require ships to operate with average main engine loads well below the limits that would be imposed by EEXI and below the average main engine loads that those ships are already operating at today. Operational carbon intensity, Regulation 28 of MARPOL Annex 6, is, like Tony said, I think the main challenge that's coming. It's a challenge because it requires potentially some substantial change, but also it comes with the uncertainty, particularly around the reduction rates that be required between 2027 and 2030. And I think the fact that there hasn't been some clear statement of what they're going to be is a really unhelpful situation for the industry to find itself in, because one of the important things that the IMO wants to be trying to deliver in this context is investment in more efficient tonnage and more efficient operations, and in particular the latter part. And it's very difficult to plan ahead to do that if you don't know what you're going to be expected to achieve. There's a diversity of views on the headline reduction rate of a 2% annual improvement between 2023 and 2026, with an ultimate cumulative reduction of 11% in AER by 2026. Some would say that's business as usual. And there are lots of ships that do already achieve that kind of rate of reduction and are well placed to achieve compliance or a good rating, an A or B rating by 2026. But that hides quite a lot of detail. And if you look at some of the data that's available about ships, for example, in the EU MRV database, what you will see is that there are quite a lot of ships that are average performance in individual sectors or below, which have to do much more than just a 2% annual reduction to be able to keep pace with what the requirement is asking for. Bulkers, for example, can be looking at 20 to 30% improvements to catch up with being rated B going forward and to maintain that to 2026. Trends in other sectors are similar, but maybe not quite so extreme. One of the other challenges with operational carbon intensity is the metrics that are being used. They're supply-based metrics, the annual efficiency ratio for the majority of ships, and CG dist for cruise passenger ships and RoPax, for example. And these metrics don't necessarily drive appropriate optimizing behaviors, and they don't give owners and operators a clear steer on what it is they're expected to do other than reduce fuel consumption per nautical mile. And there is a risk with those metrics that they actually encourage inefficient operating behaviors, and that's not helpful either. Correction factors is still an unknown. In the first iteration of all the guidance associated with this requirement, they're not included. And there's a bit of a debate to be had about whether these are about a level playing field or they're about watering down the requirement. And it depends on your sort of perception of ambition, which side of the fence you fall. But I think it's clear from the data that we've looked at the kinds of catch-ups that individual ships average ships could need to make, that it's very definitely more about a level playing field than it is about watering down the measure. The ratings are hugely important, and one of the big question marks is how will those ratings be used by the market? And I think Tony has already alluded to some of the issues there. Implementation and enforcement is two-phased, really. 2023 to 2026, we're expecting softer enforcement with the idea of corrective action plans for ships that are rated 3 times D or E in any 1 year. But it's very clear that there is an intent to make sure that implementation and enforcement regime gets much tougher after 2026 when the measure is reviewed. And previous proposals have included remedial technical efficiency for improvements for underperforming ships, and goodbye clauses for persistently underperforming ships. And that would really change the landscape, particularly if that implementation enforcement regime is accompanied by reduction rates in excess of the 2% that's already on the table. That's really where I'd like to leave it. But I think EEXI is the ticket to the game, but the challenge is operational carbon intensity reduction.
Great, Matthew. Thank you very much for that those insightful ideas. I think that they should generate quite a lot of questions, and we'll come back to you in due course. So I'd now like to turn to Marcus, Chief Naval Architect and co-founder of Foreship. Marcus, perhaps you could give us some of your thoughts regarding perhaps some of the things that have already been said, and also your thoughts as a ship designer.
Yes, thank you, Paul. I think that as a naval architect, of course, we are interested in how to improve the EEXI and CII, but like said already, it is quite clear that the well-designed ships, the EEXI is not a problem for the well-designed, relatively new ships, but the CII can be a problem because and it's not maybe so, not always related to actual emissions, the CII. So I think it's not completely well thought criteria, the CII. But maybe we would go through these items in the presentation quickly. So when we are looking at how to improve the EEXI, of course, reducing the ship speed is the most efficient one. So 1 knot reduction might be 20% improvement in EEXI, but which is a very efficient, unless of course you need to buy more ships to maintain the cargo carrying capacity of the fleet. Then you can change to lower carbon fuel, which is very efficient as well, but extremely expensive. Then you can improve the hull form, like a new bulbous bow, mainly for the older ships if you have a bulbous bow design from the wrong speed or otherwise something wrong. Then you can change the propellers, have a status or other propulsion improvement devices. Also maybe upgrading the engines to more energy efficient ones, which actually I can maybe talk more. Then if you don't yet have auxiliary the shaft generators, you could move the load to shaft generators to reduce a little bit the fuel consumption. Then there are these kind of special means like, let's say, air lubrication system and rotor sails, which I think they are quite difficult for me to know how they would help the situation because they depend on the weather conditions, but they clearly reduce the fuel consumption, but how to take them into account in the actual EEXI calculation is not clear yet. Then you can reduce the hotel load, you can recover energy and waste heat and use that for reducing the power consumption. That's quite typical on the modern cruise ships, for example. Then you can even some small changes in the dead weight or cross tonnage, and maybe you can even upgrade the ice class. You can do these kind of tricks to just get to the right side if you are near the limits. But then we go to the CII. Of course, the same means that help the EEXI help also CII, but there are other items like you could change the ships to routes with better weather conditions, so you will burn less fuel annually. You should start using the shore power, so then reduce the fuel consumption. Or here, even the batteries would become in the picture because you could charge them in the port and then discharge them at the sea and reduce the fuel consumption that way, especially if you're on the shorter routes, at least with today's batteries. Then when you have ships with very large hotel load, like cruise ships or maybe some ferries, then you should not slow down the speed too much, but go to closer to the optimum CII speed, we could say. Then also, at the moment, until there will be correction factors, hopefully, for this, you should stay less time in the port if you have a high hotel load, or less time in the anchor, which is completely against saving fuel, which is, I think, a big problem at the CII at the moment. So then the next slide, please. So this one just shows some maybe tricks how you could do. This is the container ship EEXI limit curve. So if you look at on the right, in theory at least, if you could increase the dead weight a little bit without having too much penalty on the power and speed, you could get just to the right side. Maybe increase the draft by 10-15 centimeters. Actually that with the glass, and then you would be on the right side. Or then you can do this kind of thing, which is maybe not so nice for environment, but let's say that you have a 40,500 deadweight on container ship. You reduce the deadweight by 600, and then you would be on the significantly easier side of the limit curve. So you could do this kind of trick as well, voluntarily decrease the deadweight. Then the next one, please. And this is a CII. This is maybe the biggest problem what I see there when you talk about cruise ships and ferries with the high hotel load. So this is a consumption per nautical mile for the example cruise ship. So basically the best economy is at the 12 knots, and this gives you the best CII rating. So if you slow down to 6 knots, your CII rating will get worse, but you will still burn much less fuel. So basically, in this example, it doesn't matter for CII whether you cruise at 6 knots or 21 knots. Even if the fuel consumption, there is a huge difference there. And I don't know if there will be any correction factors which would fix this kind of thing. So this is really something that is not clever at all. So there are lots of cruise ships which have this kind of day at sea. They go at 6 knots. So in the future, they should instead go 6 at 12 knots to get the better rating and pass to get the rating A or B. That's basically all from this presentation.
Marcus, thank you very much for that. That throws up quite a few questions on the more technical side. Elias, I'd like to turn to you now for a Wärtsilä perspective on life, and perhaps you can comment too on one or two of Marcus's observations there. So over to you, Elias.
Apologies, I needed to unmute myself. Many thanks, Paul, for the introduction and allowing us to present the opinion of the manufacturing industry on the new legislation. And I followed with great attention the previous presentations. There have been quite a few good points, like the EEXI is the ticket to the game. It is the start of a long process. We have also noted that the CII might require for some older vessels improvements, which are going up to 20 to 30% relative to the current vessel situation, which needs to be taken into account. And there has been also a very good point from Marcus regarding the operational speed, how you are really going for improvement on the emissions and on the performance, or by strictly applying EPL. At some cases, you might not see the results that you are expecting. I do have a couple of slides to show. So if it is possible to start with what is our opinion beyond the EEDI, EEXI, CII, there is the major subject of decarbonization. And we believe that it will be a key issue in the marine industry in the coming period, on the same way that became a key issue in the automotive industry, driving specific solutions. And we need to take into account that we will live for a long period of time with the effort of the industry to adopt to a new situation. And there are a few ways that we believe the manufacturing industry could help improving. And I mentioned a few of them, starting from the left side of the slide. We are developing new fuels. We are testing our equipment with new fuels. And we are expecting that this will be applicable in the industry in the coming years, with us ultimate to go to hydrogen, which does not have a carbon content at the end. We are also aiming at fuel flexibility, allowing gas fuels, ammonia, different types of fuels for operation, helping in case that one fuel is not possible. I would put some attention on what I have shown at the middle as a product and system improvement, how we are improving the various products and the systems on board of the vessel. But I would like also to mention that there are alternatives which are studied both for a new build and retrofit activities on creating hybrid solutions. The digitalization, which was a big trend in the coming years, I believe that this is going to contribute to the decarbonization effort. Although, of course, the solutions which are applicable on new build can be different from those applicable to the retrofit projects. Overall, there is a need for an effort. And from our side, we are trying to contribute by improving the products, providing alternatives, because clearly there is no one solution fitting all. There are various solutions, and the advice from our side is to investigate what is possible, what is applicable to a given vessel, taking into account what has been said earlier. There are vessels which are built at different chronological periods with different technologies, and they can have a different challenging degree of improvement. So if I move to the next slide, on this product improvement performance, we are developing an array of solutions. And some of those solutions are related directly to propeller and the propeller environment, including new innovative rudders, like the gate rudder that we are co-developing together with industrial partners from Japan, new types of propellers, because we don't have only requirements on decarbonization. Requirements of decarbonization are going also together with requirements for low noise. So we are improving there, and we are introducing also other solutions like wind energy and air lubrication, where we believe that they have a position to play in the future, position in the array of solutions that we are offering. Although, as mentioned also by the speakers, how exactly the impact is going to be calculated, to be taken into account into the EEXI and to CII is currently open to interpretation. But for us, the key issue is that everything which contributes to better efficiency is good for the environment, and at the end, it will achieve the merits also on improving the performance and the positioning of the vessel relative to the competition. And again, each solution needs to be seen separately. Wind is of importance, provides big possibilities. However, it is applicable on specific routes of high wind intensity. So everything needs to be taken into account. And actually, when I'm showing this slide, I'm also mentioning an array of solutions which can be applicable in the industry. If we move then to the next slide, what we try to do for different vessel types is to bundle those technologies, creating packages which are aiming at a high impact to the efficiency of the vessel and then to the EEXI. And we are talking about numbers higher than 10 or 20%. So we are combining technologies which can be combined together can impact different losses of the vessel configuration. If we are bundling them correctly, then you see that the impact of the efficiency and consequently on the EEXI would be quite significant. And again, this EEXI is the ticket to the game. CII is to follow, and I personally believe that we will be occupied on the decarbonization the years to come. Thank you, Paul.
Elias, thank you very much. That's fascinating thoughts there. So we've had a broad range of opinions there from the participants. All seem to agree that the CII is the main challenge, and for older bulk carriers, which have been picked out specifically, improvements of 20 to 30% may be required. That seems a huge challenge, but as Elias has just pointed out, by bundling things together, it is actually possible to achieve efficiency gains of that level, although the return on investment may be a question. So we're going to pause now for a short video from ADNOC Logistics and Services, and then we're going to return for an interactive discussion and some questions from the audience. Thank you.
ADNOC Logistics and Services is the shipping and maritime logistics arm of ADNOC Group and the largest integrated maritime company in the Middle East. With over 40 years of experience in shipping and maritime logistics, we offer agile, integrated, and seamless end-to-end solutions across the entire oil and gas supply chain. We own and operate the UAE's largest and most diverse shipping fleet, with more than 240 owned and chartered vessels in service at any given time. Our shipping vessels call at 65 ports in 160 countries over 6 continents. ADNOC LNS offers specialist marine services, maintaining critical subsea infrastructure, and is a strategic partner to all Abu Dhabi petroleum ports. Our marine services also include oil spill response and HNS services, catering to the UAE and the region. Our integrated logistics solutions support the entire oil and gas supply chain in the UAE, from upstream to downstream, and include the largest maritime logistics base in the region at 1.5 million square meters. Our integrated logistics solutions are critical for all offshore operations, transporting both equipment and personnel. We are committed to 100% HSE, our people, our planet, and value generation for our customers. At ADNOC Logistics and Services, we are going further every day to secure the UAE's leadership in the global maritime sector.
Well, welcome back to the second part of today's session, which, as I say, is going to be an interactive discussion. I'd like to kick things off, first of all, with a question for Tony and possibly others relating to the funding of improvements relating to CII for older ships. We've seen the banks express their sustainability drive through the Poseidon principles, but some of these ships that require urgent attention are quite old already, and so although the ESG criteria for making ships more efficient would be met, the assets themselves are very old, or quite old. So how do you see this working out from a funding point of view, Tony?
Thanks, Paul. I think it rather depends which sector of the market you're in. So if, for example, you are a major container line, you know that you are going to be operating certain assets for the next 15 years if you can, even though those assets are middle-aged today. So you then need to have a plan. We've discussed this with Matthew and his colleagues at some length at LR. And arguably today, that plan is one that you as a company have to make yourself in anticipation of where the rules might be headed, and then try to get ahead of the curve, so to speak. And I'm sure that the other panelists can talk more about that from the technical perspective. From the funding perspective, there are various challenges. One is the legal issue of appendages, in the sense that the lending bank has full security over the asset through the mortgage. So anyone applying appendages and owning them can't have security over the ship, because that security sits with the main lending bank. So there's a sort of legal or legalistic problem there. Generally speaking, I think that the banks will be willing to participate in assisting long-term owners to fund solutions. And I think that the solutions will look something like the packages that Elias was talking about. I think the packages are very important. The companies will have to work together with class and manufacturers to put these packages together, and they will have to produce demonstrable outputs in terms of GHG reduction. And those demonstrable outputs will provide a pathway which is at least as good as, if not better than, for example, the current IMO pathway or the current Poseidon Principles pathway, which is more or less the same thing. And once you do that, I think you can get funding. The question then, of course, is how many companies will have the power, both in terms of personnel, time and effort, and money to make that work. It's all very well if you're a top liner company, but not so good if you're a medium-sized independent ship owner. And I think there the problems are much greater. So that's how it looks from our perspective at the moment.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. There's a more technical question come in from Dimitris Miniardis regarding MEPC 76. He says, during MEP 76, EEXI became stricter by about 10%, and it's now 83% of maximum continuous rating of the engine. How do you think this will affect carbon intensity indicator performance, since permitted maximum speeds will presumably have to be reduced? Marcus, would you like to have a go at that one?
Yes, thanks. I would say that as long as the consumption per nautical mile reduces, then the CII will get better. And on the cargo ships, when you reduce the engine power and go slower, then the CII will get better. So in that way, the stricter EEXI will mean better CII.
Thank you. One of the things that Tony mentioned earlier on was the possibility of the regulations as they stand today actually prolonging the lives of older assets, because people don't want to invest in new ones. And in actual fact, that's a bit of a dichotomy, because it's not what the IMO is trying to do. Would anyone like to pick up on that and discuss that? Matthew, have you got thoughts on that?
Classic. Yeah, certainly, Paul. Just before I do, I'm just going to pick up on Marcus's point there in response to the previous question. Whilst there is a correlation between the technical efficiency of a ship and the kind of annual operational carbon intensity reductions that it may be able to achieve, it's important to recognise that how a ship is operated is more important for your CII performance than its technical efficiency. We see ships that are very technically efficient, which don't score as well as ships that are less technically efficient because of how they're operated. So whilst the IMO has made that change to the way of calculating the attained EEXI, if a ship is already operating at an average main engine load well below that power limit, actually that reduction isn't going to make much difference to that ship or its CII performance. If it is operating at or near that limit already, then of course, yes, there would be some change. But I'd like to emphasize that it's how a ship is operated that is the biggest determinant of CII performance. And that's what the IMO is intending to achieve with that measure. In terms of prolonging the life of sort of existing ships, if you like, I think the main issue there is really uncertainty. So the IMO, both in terms of the reduction rates for later in this decade and in general around its approach of how it's going to encourage an energy transition in shipping to achieve its objectives for 2050, there is so much uncertainty there that holding on to existing assets and using them to the best of their ability, adapting how they're operated to keep decent CI performance until the future becomes that bit clearer about what it is the IMO is going to do. Yes, I think there is an incentive to hold on to what you have, provided you're able to adapt it technically or operationally to meet the expectations of the markets. So yes, if the IMO does, the regulators generally do want to encourage a shift towards much more efficient ships and a fleet replacement program, effectively, then they need to shore up greater certainty about what's coming in the future so that owners, operators, financial institutions can plan ahead to be able to invest in the sustainability of the industry with the certainty that that's, it's not going to be wasted investment because we know this change is coming, but to be able to plan it properly.
Thank you, Matthew. I've got a question here that's come in for I think probably for Elias, and that is it relates to what Matthew referred to, the overridable power limit, which is seen as one of the easiest way for some ships to comply with CII. But that will mean that ships, designed for, let's say, 15 knots, might cut back to 12 or 13 knots, at which point the water flow around the hull is not optimized. So could it be that by going for overridable power limits, it actually means that there are going to have to be adjustments for either with a smaller or bigger propeller or fins or ducts or perhaps even a different bulbous bow?
Well, it is a good question indeed. And to be sincere, there is no one single solution because it needs to be examined vessel by vessel. I'll give an example. There are some container ships which are originally designed for 23 to 25 knots, and they are currently already operating with a slow steaming at around 15 to 16 knots. If you expect for such a vessel to further reduce the speed, of course, this will create a kind of a super slow steaming situation, and then you need to examine very carefully how the overall vessel and the propeller in this specific case is performing. So from that point of view, I believe a close examination of each vessel type and trying to adapt, finding out what is the best economical solution that you can follow. I believe it is the important item. And at the time that there is indeed more certainty about the future, then you take, then you might be required to adapt your strategy, as also Matthew has mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Elias. Do you think, therefore, that older ships that are more likely to have larger engines are in a better position, perhaps, than more recent ship designs with smaller engines?
Well, actually, it is very difficult to provide a good comment on this, because once again, every case needs to be seen separately. More modern equipment has a higher efficiencies and higher possibilities. But overall, what I'm indeed proposing is to examine each case separately and to find a solution also for the older equipment to be able to keep them as long as required, and
Right.
then take your conscious decision if you like to adopt your policy at the time that the legislation is a little bit refined.
Yes, thank you. Right, there's a general question coming, which I'd like to ask across the panel, really. It's from Dennis Amer, who asks, what is the panelists' opinion on the level of preparedness of ship owners, especially bulk carriers owners, as the highlighted sector, for meeting CII standards? Are they forming plans despite the uncertainty? Matthew, would you like to start with that? Because you've mentioned that in your presentation.
Yeah, certainly, Paul. I think it's fair to say that bulk carriers is one highlighted sector indeed here. But actually, if I'm thinking about awareness across the board, I think there's a general awareness that change is coming. But I do still think there's work to be done in making sure that owners and operators understand the detail of what that means. And I'm not sure, whilst Lloyd's Register is putting a huge amount of effort into getting everybody up to speed as best we can, I'm not sure that there is still a universal understanding of just quite a challenge that CII may present, whether it's bulk carriers, tankers, container ships, or any other sector indeed. But we are seeing that there are the companies looking to understand what the impact of this measure could be under what we know and under various scenarios of what could happen in the future, so they can start to plan. Because I think there are only two certainties in all of this at the moment. And the first is that the level of ambition in terms of carbon intensity reduction and greenhouse gas emissions reduction will continue at least at its current rate for the foreseeable future, and may well increase later in the decade. And that having an efficient ship, and I don't just mean a technically efficient ship on paper, I mean a ship that actually has very low fuel consumption per nautical mile in operation, is going to be critical and is a great way of preparing, whether it's for reducing carbon intensity or indeed being prepared for the future of using different fuels. We know that those fuels could either be more expensive or more difficult to get hold of, and the result is therefore that the ship needs to be consuming as little of them as possible. So there are some certainties that we can hold on to in terms of being prepared for the future, and we are helping companies do that, yes.
Great, Matthew. Thank you very much for that. Well, I'd like to bring in both Elias and Marcus on this point too, because you're actually at the sharp end of receiving questions and queries from ship operators and owners. So what do you feel? Do you feel that they're wanting to get prepared?
Can I start, Marcus?
Please go ahead.
Okay, actually, I have seen an unprecedented interest to understand what is the impact of technology on the CII, a concern from the owners, which actually is reflected to activities, understand the technologies, initiate sometimes pilot projects to have a direct feeling on what the technology is bringing to them. And an issue of concern, especially for owners with larger fleets, is the availability of technologies and availability of capacity in the industry. Because if you need to go for a dry docking and you need to have the availability of the equipment on time, you need to be also well prepared. It is not that the technologies will be available in your hands in 1 or 2 months, and they are out of the shelf. They need to be ordered, and the availability of solutions on time to have it for the dry docking at the exact time. I think it's a significant issue of concern.
Great, thank you. Marcus, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, the orders we discussed, they have all made preparations, and even in that way that like it was said that let's say 2 similar ships, other one can get the CII rating E and the other one D rating. So they have even plans that they after 3 years, because you can have a D rating for 3 years and then you have to improve it. So they have already plans that they will swap the route so that the ship gets D rating, 3 years later it will be changed to other route, and the exactly same ship takes that route, and then again it can have 3 years the D rating. So basically this is not helping the environment, but by swapping the ships you can work around this as well. So they are making plans.
Yeah, right, thank you. Tony, you mentioned the position of container lines. I'm just wondering about whether container lines are actually quite a long way down the road already, because they often pay for their own fuel, whereas bulk carriers and tankers owners are often working with charterers who pick up the tab for bunkers. So do you think container lines are ahead?
Yes, probably yes, and generally they have the ability to be ahead because, as you imply, they don't face the split incentive problem. If you're a tonnage provider, you still have this issue that you might want and need to invest in the kit, but you're not sure how you're going to get paid for the extra cost because you have to take market exposure. So this comes back to the whole discussion around whether or not the contractual relationships in certain sectors will change over time. Excuse me, in order to facilitate this process effectively. That is one obvious route to making everything work. But as of today, the market isn't seemingly ready to change its modus operandi.
Right. Well, 1 hour has gone very quickly. I think next time we need to organise a weekend probably. But I'll soon pass back to Emma to update you on sessions that are coming in the next few weeks. First of all, though, I'd like to thank our excellent panel members today for their insights and their valuable thoughts. And I'd also like to thank everybody who has attended from wherever you may be, and I wish you a good rest of the day and safety and security for you and your loved ones. Thank you. Emma.
Thank you very much, Paul, for moderating another very interesting Global Maritime Club forum. Don't forget, this session will be available on demand in the Maritime online series platform. So if you found this session valuable, please do invite colleagues who couldn't make it to the live session to watch this on demand. Also, do check out the rest of the live and on-demand content on offer throughout the month-long Maritime series event in the agenda pages of this platform. The next live session will take place next Wednesday with our Sea Asia virtual Harnessing AI for Shipping webinar. And as a quick reminder to let you know, call for entries for both the Sea Trade Awards and Sea Trade Maritime Awards, Middle East, Indian subcontinent and Africa, both now in association with Lloyd's List, are still open, but deadlines are looming. So please do make sure you enter ahead of the deadlines, which can be found on the websites. Thank you again to our conference partner, ADNOC Logistics and Services, and our affiliate sponsor for today's session, Lloyd's Register. Thank you all for watching and taking part. And until next time, thank you and goodbye.